My name is Lenora Jotsna, and I'm 26 years old. 12 years ago, my parents handed me a typed lease agreement for my childhood bedroom. I was 14. They charged me $400 a month to live in their house. They told me life was not free. Meanwhile, they paid $180,000 for my older sister Harper's Ivy League degree, her luxury apartment, and her brand new car. I paid my rent. But I kept every single receipt. 12 years and $57,600 later, I walked into my parents' 30th anniversary party uninvited. 200 of their high society friends watched as I walked up to the head table and handed my father a black leather folder. When he opened it, the color drained from his face, and his hand started shaking so hard his champagne glass rattled against the china. Before I tell you what was inside that folder, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Sophia Told Stories, but only if you believe in holding people accountable. And drop a comment telling me your age and what your very first job was. I want to see who else had to grow up faster than they should have. Now let me take you back 12 years to a laminate kitchen table in Hartford, Connecticut, where my childhood officially ended. Growing up in the Jotsna household meant understanding early on that there were two ledgers, one for Harper and one for me. Harper is 3 years older. She was the daughter who performed, the cheerleader, the debate team captain, the girl who wore the right clothes and said the right things to my parents' country club friends. My parents, Richard and Diane, valued appearances above oxygen. Harper was their trophy. I was just the quiet kid reading in the corner. The week I turned 14, I walked into the kitchen to find my father sitting at the table. He slid a piece of paper across the wood. A formal rental agreement, $400 a month due on the 1st. It covered my twin bed, my share of the water bill, and basic groceries. He looked me in the eye and said it was time I learned the value of $1. He called it building character. I looked past his shoulder through the archway into the living room. Harper was standing on a stool while my mother pinned the hem of a $2,000 sequined prom dress they had just bought her on credit. Harper did not have a job. She did not have a lease. I did not cry. I signed the paper. The next day, I walked to the local grocery store and begged the manager to let me bag groceries under the table. I worked weekend shifts at a diner, smelling like stale coffee and industrial bleach. I missed football games and school dances because I was pulling 20 to 30 hours a week just to avoid being evicted from my own home. Every first of the month, I slid $400 in crumpled bills across that same kitchen table. Every time my father wrote out a carbon copy receipt from a booklet he kept in his desk drawer, he handed me the yellow slip. I took it upstairs and put it in a shoebox under my bed. He thought he was teaching me a harsh economic lesson. What he was really doing was teaching me how to keep immaculate records. And those records were about to become the foundation of an empire he never saw coming. To understand how a family fractures, you have to look at their accounting. My father, Richard, was a man who worshipped spreadsheets and fiscal discipline. He liked to give long lectures at the dinner table about the economy, about personal responsibility, about how the real world chewed up the weak. But our household operated on a dual economy. There were two distinct ledgers in the Jotsna house. For me, capitalism was ruthless and exact. For my older sister, Harper, it was a bottomless trust fund masked as parental support. After I signed that lease agreement at 14 years old, my life split into two realities. By day, I was a high school sophomore trying to keep my grades up. By night, I was a ghost haunting the service industry. I found a diner on the edge of town whose manager did not care about child labor laws as long as I showed up on time and did not complain. I scrubbed flat-top grills. I carried trays of heavy ceramic plates. I took orders from tired truck drivers at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I did my geometry homework in the employee break room, sitting on an overturned milk crate next to a leaking mop bucket. I worked 20 to 30 hours a week. I came home every night smelling of old fryer grease, industrial bleach, and stale coffee. I would sneak through the back door and strip off my uniform in the laundry room, just so the smell would not offend my parents. The contrast between my reality and the rest of the house was blinding. My mother, Diane, was the chief architect of our public image. She hosted garden club meetings and charity planning committees in our pristine living room. She valued the perception of perfection above anything else. If a neighbor asked why I was never at the community pool or why I skipped the neighborhood block party, my mother would offer a bright, practiced smile. She would tell them I was deeply committed to my extracurriculars. She would say I was a driven student. She never once admitted that her youngest daughter was scraping dried ketchup off laminated menus just to pay her own father for the right to sleep down the hall. Let us do the math. $400 a month, $4,800 a year. That is a staggering sum for a child making sub-minimum wage under the table. Every single dollar was earned with aching arches and grease burns on my forearms. Every first of the month, I sat on my bedroom floor and counted out the cash. Ones, fives, tens, and 20s. I ironed the wrinkled bills flat with my hands. I handed them over. I took my yellow carbon receipt. I placed it in a Nike shoebox beneath my bed. I never threw a tantrum. I never screamed at them about the unfairness of it all. Screaming implies you believe the other person has the capacity to care. I knew they did not. So I simply observed. I became a quiet archivist of their towering hypocrisy. That hypocrisy reached its peak during the spring of my sophomore year. April arrived and the air in Connecticut was just starting to thaw. Harper was 17 and waiting for the mail every single afternoon. She had spent the last year touring elite colleges on our parents' dime, staying in boutique hotels and buying new wardrobes for every campus visit. Then the thick envelope arrived from Ithaca, Cornell University. The house erupted into a festival of validation. My father left work early, which he never did. He walked through the front door carrying 2 bottles of imported champagne. My mother immediately started making phone calls to every woman in her tennis league, making sure they all knew her daughter was Ivy League material. It also happened to be the first of the month. I was in my bedroom counting my tips from the week. I had $300 in 20s and a stack of singles I had to band together with a hair tie. I put the exact sum of $400 into a plain white envelope. I walked out of my room and headed down the carpeted hallway toward the master bedroom. The door was cracked open just a few inches. I could hear the pop of the cork. I could hear the clinking of crystal flutes. I stood there in the shadows, holding my envelope of small bills while my parents celebrated their golden child. My father was giving a toast. I heard him laughing. Then I heard him say the number aloud, $180,000. He did not say it with panic or worry. He said it with deep, profound pride. They were going to write a check for $180,000 so Harper could study art history and live in a luxury off-campus apartment. They were going to buy her a meal plan so she would never have to cook. They were going to give her a monthly allowance so she could focus on the college experience. I looked down at my own hands. My knuckles were cracked from industrial dish soap. I had a fresh burn on my wrist from the diner coffee maker. I was 14 years old, and I was holding my own survival in a paper envelope. I knelt on the carpet. I slid the envelope under the doorframe. I watched it glide across the hardwood floor and stop near my father's polished leather shoes. The talking paused for just a second. Through the crack in the door, I watched my father look down. He picked up the envelope containing my blood and sweat. He slipped it into his slacks without missing a single beat of his conversation. He raised his glass and handed his favorite daughter another pour of champagne. I walked back to my room in silence. The next morning, the yellow carbon receipt was sitting on the kitchen counter waiting for me. I took it upstairs and added it to the shoebox. I watched the stack of paper grow thicker. I realized something very important that night. They did not need my money. They were not struggling to pay the mortgage or keep the lights on. They charged me rent because they wanted to break me. They wanted to ensure I was too tired and too broke to ever challenge the hierarchy of the house. They needed me to stay at the bottom so Harper could float at the top. For the next 4 years, I operated like a ghost in my own home. I paid for my own clothes, I paid for my own school supplies, I bought my own toothpaste. I kept my head down and my mouth shut. I watched them buy Harper a new designer wardrobe for her sophomore year at Cornell. I watched them pay for her spring break trip to Cabo. I watched my mother brag about Harper's internship at a modern art gallery, an internship that paid nothing but looked beautiful on a resume. I kept working. I moved from the diner to a receptionist job at a local real estate office. I learned how to file deeds and read property contracts. I learned that leverage is the only thing that matters in this world. I kept paying my $400 a month. I kept adding yellow slips to the shoebox. I told myself I could survive it. I just had to make it to high school graduation. I just had to keep handing over the envelopes and bide my time until I could escape on my own terms. I thought I had the system figured out. But the problem with extortion is that the landlord holds all the power. The exact moment you slip up, the landlord stops pretending to be your father. The fragile arrangement we had built shattered on a cold morning in November, just weeks after I turned 18. I caught a severe case of pneumonia and missed a full week of work. When the first of the month rolled around, I was exactly $150 short. And that was the day Richard Jyotsna decided to teach me his final lesson. November in Connecticut is unforgiving. The air turns sharp and the cold seeps through the floorboards of old houses. I had just turned 18. It was not a milestone celebrated with a cake or a dinner reservation in the Jyotsna household. It was simply the month I legally became an adult in the eyes of the state. 2 weeks after my birthday, I woke up with a deep, hollow rattle in my chest. By the third day, my joints ached and my vision swam. The doctor at the free community clinic listened to my breathing through a cold stethoscope and diagnosed me with severe pneumonia. He handed me a prescription for antibiotics I could not afford to fill. Later that afternoon, my diner manager took one look at my pale, sweating face and sent me home. He told me not to come back until the fever broke. That meant missing 5 scheduled shifts. 5 shifts at my under-the-table hourly rate equaled an absolute financial disaster. I sat on my bedroom floor on the last day of the month. My lungs burned with every breath. I emptied my glass jar of tips onto the carpet and began counting the crumpled bills. I smoothed out the ones, the 5s, the 10s. I counted the pile 3 separate times, hoping a stray $20 bill had somehow stuck to another. It had not. The math remained stubborn and exact. I had $250. I was exactly $150 short of my monthly rent. The next morning was December 1st. I walked down the carpeted stairs holding my plain white envelope. The house smelled of expensive vanilla candles and fresh dark roast coffee. My father sat at the kitchen table reading the morning newspaper. My mother stood at the marble island meticulously slicing a fresh pink grapefruit. I set the envelope on the wood in front of my father. I kept my posture straight despite the fever making my knees weak. I am $150 short, I said. I caught pneumonia. I missed a week of shifts at the diner. I can get the rest of the cash to you by next Friday. Richard lowered his newspaper. He picked up the envelope, but did not bother to open it. He looked at me with an expression of mild corporate disappointment. He folded his hands together. "Lenora, the real world does not operate on excuses," he said. His voice was smooth and practiced. A bank does not care if you have a fever. A landlord does not care if you missed a shift. If I let this slide, I am doing you a terrible disservice. You need to learn how actions have consequences. I stared at him. I tried to find a trace of paternal instinct behind his eyes. There was nothing but rigid economic doctrine. "You are 18 now," he continued. "You are a legal adult. Since you cannot meet the terms of your lease agreement, you have until noon today to vacate the premises." I turned my head and looked at my mother. Diane did not stop slicing her grapefruit. She did not even look up from the cutting board. She simply placed the silver knife down and wiped her hands on a linen towel. "Your father is right, Lenora," she said. Her tone was light, as if discussing the weather. "You need to learn responsibility. This is for your own good." I walked back upstairs. I did not cry. Crying is a biological response asking for comfort, and I knew there was no comfort to be found inside those walls. I pulled 3 heavy-duty black plastic garbage bags from the hall closet. I went to my room and packed my entire life. I folded my faded jeans, my work shirts, and my few paperback books. I stripped the sheets off the twin bed and left them folded neatly on the bare mattress. As I tied a tight knot on the 3rd garbage bag, I heard the loud mechanical groan of a heavy diesel engine out front. I walked to my bedroom window and looked down through the glass. A flatbed tow truck was backing slowly into our pristine driveway. Sitting on the steel bed of the truck was a brand new white BMW sedan. The paint gleamed under the winter sun. A giant red velvet bow was stuck to the front windshield. Harper was graduating from Cornell at the end of the spring semester. This was her early graduation gift. I stood at the window and watched my father walk out the front door wearing his weekend cashmere sweater. He greeted the delivery driver with a broad, enthusiastic smile. He inspected the luxury vehicle. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the exact same silver ballpoint pen he used to write my carbon copy rent receipts every month. He signed the delivery manifest. He handed the driver a generous cash tip. I picked up my garbage bags. I carried them down the stairs, one by one. I bypassed the front door and walked out the side entrance so I would not ruin their perfect family photo opportunity in the driveway. Harper had just run out of the house wearing silk pajamas. She was squealing and throwing her arms around our father's neck, thanking him for the extravagant car. I dragged my plastic bags down the sidewalk to the street where my rusted Honda Civic was parked. I had bought that car for $800 from a junkyard mechanic 2 years prior. The heater only worked when the engine was running at highway speeds. I shoved the heavy bags into the trunk and forced it shut. I opened the passenger door and placed my Nike shoebox on the seat. The yellow receipts were safe inside. That night, the temperature dropped below freezing. I parked my car in the back corner of a 24-hour supermarket parking lot, hoping the security guards would ignore me. I put on 3 layers of sweaters and wrapped myself in a thin fleece blanket. I woke up at 2 a.m. shivering so hard my teeth ached in my gums. Frost coated the inside of my windshield, obscuring the harsh yellow glow of the parking lot streetlights. The cold seeped through the floorboards and settled deep into my bones. When the sun finally rose, I turned on my phone. The battery was low. I stared at the screen and decided to try one final time. I thought perhaps the freezing temperatures might have softened his rigid principles. I dialed my father's number. It rang once and went straight to a generic automated voicemail. He had blocked me. I dialed my mother's cell phone. The exact same result. They had severed the connection. I was an embarrassment who could not pay rent. I opened my text messages and typed a brief message to my sister. "I'm sleeping in my car," I wrote. "Mom and Dad kicked me out over $150. Can you ask them to just give me 1 week?" I watched the typing indicator bubble appear on my cracked screen. It vanished. It appeared again. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated in my freezing hand. Harper did not offer to help. She did not offer to wire me the money from her bottomless monthly allowance. She did not ask if I was safe. She sent a single reply containing 2 words and 1 emoji. "Grow up." A broken heart symbol followed the text. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the glowing screen. My lungs burned from the lingering infection. My fingers were numb and stiff. But something inside my chest crystallized into solid, unyielding ice. I set the phone down in the cup holder. I looked at the shoebox sitting on the passenger seat. That was the last time I ever asked my family for anything. I turned the ignition key. The engine sputtered, complained, and finally caught. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward the city. My parents thought they had discarded a failure to teach a lesson in responsibility. They had no idea they had just created their own worst nightmare. Sleeping in a rusted vehicle during a New England winter teaches you the exact difference between a minor inconvenience and a threat to your biological survival. I lasted 19 days in that supermarket parking lot. I layered every article of clothing I owned to prevent frostbite. I brushed my teeth in the harsh, fluorescent light of a gas station restroom. I ate cheap peanut butter straight from the jar because it offered the highest ratio of calories to cost. I did not shed a single tear during those 19 days. Weeping expends energy, and I needed every fraction of my strength to execute my exit strategy. On the 20th day, I found a listing for a basement room in a dilapidated duplex on the industrial side of town. The landlord did not ask for a credit score or a parental cosigner. He only cared about cash up front. I reached into my Nike shoebox, counted out the required funds, and handed them over. The room smelled of damp concrete and old dust, but it had a working radiator. That radiator felt like the greatest luxury I had ever experienced. Once I secured basic shelter, I returned to my receptionist job at the local commercial property firm. The fever had finally broken, leaving me with a hollow cough and a singular, unrelenting focus. I realized very quickly that the traditional avenues of upward mobility were closed to me. I could not become a doctor or an engineer. Those paths require university degrees. Universities require federal financial aid applications. Those applications require parental tax information and signatures. My parents had made it abundantly clear they would never participate in my future. I had no safety net, no trust fund, and no margin for error. I looked around the office, where I answered phones and filed deeds. Commercial real estate did not care about your pedigree. It did not care who your parents were or where you spent your summers. It only cared about numbers, contracts, and leverage. If you understood the math and possessed the tolerance for extreme financial risk, you could buy a seat at the table. I decided right then to master the math. I stopped being a mere receptionist. I became a silent sponge. I stayed late to read archived acquisition contracts. I studied how the senior brokers negotiated zoning variances and structured holding companies. I learned the language of escrow amortizations and capital gains. That was when Vivian noticed me. Vivian was the senior managing partner of the firm. She was a woman in her late 50s who wore immaculate tailored suits and commanded a room simply by refusing to speak until everyone else stopped talking. She was formidable, sharp, and entirely unsentimental. One Tuesday afternoon, she dropped a complex 50-page commercial lease agreement on my desk and told me to copy it for a client meeting. As I fed the pages through the scanner, my eyes caught a discrepancy in the gross lease calculations on page 14. The square footage multipliers did not align with the common area maintenance fees. I took a red pen, circled the error, and handed the stack back to her. Vivian looked at the red ink. She looked at me. "You just saved me $40,000, she said. Her voice was flat, giving nothing away. Most girls your age would be shaking right now, trying to point out a mistake to a senior partner. You do not even blink, do you?" I looked back at her with the same level gaze. "Blinking does not fix the math," I replied. That brief exchange altered the trajectory of my life. Vivian became my mentor. She saw something in me that my own mother never bothered to look for. She recognized the cold detachment I had developed as a trauma response and taught me how to weaponize it for the boardroom. "Emotion costs margin," she told me one evening over black coffee. "In this industry, the person who cares the least about being liked wins the negotiation." Your family gave you a gift, Lenora. They stripped away your need for approval. Now use that empty space to build equity. I took her advice as gospel. I stopped working hourly shifts at the diner and earned my real estate license. I transitioned from the reception desk to junior associate. I worked 80-hour weeks. I did not take weekends off. I did not go to clubs or take vacations. While other people my age were discovering themselves on backpacking trips across Europe, I was sitting in municipal planning offices, arguing with city clerks about structural permits. By the time I turned 22, I had accumulated enough capital from aggressive commission structures to make my first independent move. I found a distressed warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The roof was sagging, and the foundation needed critical repair. Every other investor passed on it because the rehabilitation costs looked prohibitive. I ran my own numbers. I saw an emerging logistics corridor that the city council was planning to rezone within the next 18 months. I drained my savings account empty. I used every dollar from that old Nike shoebox to secure the down payment. I bought the warehouse. I managed the contractors myself, showing up at the site at 5 a.m. to ensure no one cut corners. 14 months later, the rezoning passed. A regional shipping company desperately needed distribution space in that exact sector. I flipped the property for 3 times my initial investment. That single transaction birthed my silent empire. I took the revenue and rolled it into a multi-family apartment complex. I stabilized the tenant base, raised the property value, and leveraged the equity to buy a suburban retail plaza. I moved with relentless precision. I formed a property management holding company to shield my assets and minimize my tax liabilities. I hired my own staff. I cultivated a reputation as a ghost in the local market, a buyer who always closed the deal but never showed up in the society pages. The crown jewel of my portfolio came when I was 25. I purchased a sprawling historic estate that had fallen into bankruptcy. I spent millions restoring the vaulted glass ceilings, the manicured gardens, and the iron-wrought gates. I transformed it into the most exclusive luxury event venue in the state. I named the overarching company Sterling Management, in a quiet nod to the mentor who handed me my first real chance. 8 years had passed since I dragged 3 garbage bags down a freezing sidewalk. In those 8 years, I had constructed a fortress of wealth. I was a self-made millionaire several times over. I owned the land beneath the feet of the people who used to look right through me. Yet the most satisfying element of my success was the absolute silence surrounding it. My parents and my sister lived in the exact same city, but our worlds never intersected. I did not exist in their circles of country club brunches and charity galas. I existed in the holding companies that owned the buildings where they held those galas. Through mutual acquaintances and quiet whispers, I knew exactly what narrative my family had spun to explain my absence. They told their friends I was a rebellious disappointment. Harper told people I was likely struggling to pay rent in a squalid apartment pouring coffee for minimum wage. They needed me to be a failure. My presumed misery was the foundational pillar holding up their fragile superiority. They had no idea I possessed more capital than their entire lineage combined. I intended to let them keep their comfortable delusions forever. I had no desire to seek them out or demand their acknowledgement. I was content to let them fade into irrelevance while I expanded my territory. But fate possesses a cruel sense of humor, because while I was quietly purchasing commercial districts, Harper was busy constructing a spectacular house of cards, and her delusions were about to drag my parents directly into my crosshairs. While I built equity in the shadows, my sister constructed a masterpiece of fiction in broad daylight. A piece of paper from an Ivy League institution grants you access to elite job interviews. It does not magically bestow a work ethic upon you. Harper graduated from Cornell with honors in art history. She walked across the stage wearing a custom silk gown while my parents cheered from the front row, taking hundreds of photographs to share with their social circle. They handed her the keys to that white luxury sedan and expected her to conquer the corporate world. But the real world is not a forgiving country club mixer. It demands actual output and tangible results. Harper landed an entry-level gallery position through one of our father's golf connections. She lasted exactly 4 months in that role. The gallery director asked her to organize a storage room of archival prints, and she deemed the physical task beneath her prestigious pedigree. She quit without giving formal notice, claiming the environment stifled her creative vision. Instead of securing new employment, she decided her true calling was lifestyle influencing. She curated a digital aesthetic of expensive brunch plates, boutique shopping bags, and exotic travel destinations. Her social media profiles painted a flawless portrait of a thriving, independent young professional navigating high society. The reality behind the screen was a catastrophic financial deficit. Maintaining an illusion requires constant capital, and influencing without sponsorships is just an expensive hobby. When the gallery paychecks stopped, Harper turned to high-interest credit cards. She opened multiple accounts to balance the balances, playing a dangerous game of financial musical chairs. When those credit limits maxed out, she pivoted to the Bank of Richard and Diane. She told our parents she was investing in her personal brand. She framed her chronic unemployment as an innovative entrepreneurial venture that just needed seed money to flourish. They wrote the checks without hesitation. They liquidated a portion of their mutual funds. They dipped deep into their retirement accounts to fund her cosmetic dermatology appointments and her weekend trips to the Hamptons. They did this because cutting her off would mean admitting their golden investment had severely depreciated. My parents possessed a deep psychological need for Harper to triumph. Her victory was supposed to validate their harsh parenting methods. It was supposed to prove that paying $180,000 for an education was a brilliant strategic maneuver rather than a colossal waste of resources. To maintain this fragile illusion, Harper needed a foil. She needed someone to stand in the dark so her dim light could appear bright. She used me to cast that shadow. Through the reliable grapevine of extended family, I learned exactly what she was saying behind my back. Harper told our aunts and cousins that she saw me serving drinks at a dirty dive bar downtown. She fabricated elaborate stories about me living in a squalid studio apartment surrounded by unpaid utility bills. She would sigh heavily at family dinners and play the tragic older sister, expressing fake pity for my miserable existence. My parents swallowed every single word eagerly. They needed me to be a cautionary tale. My perceived failure justified their decision to throw me into the freezing cold over $150. If I was suffering in poverty, then their iron fist discipline was correct. It meant I was simply too weak to survive the lesson they tried to teach me. Let me pause the story for a brief moment. If you have ever watched the golden child fail at the real world while you quietly succeeded, type karma in the comments. There is a very specific kind of justice in watching someone drown in the exact same pool they pushed you into. I knew about her financial ruin long before my parents figured it out. I knew the truth because the raw data crossed my desk on a mundane Thursday afternoon. My property management firm, Sterling Management, oversees a vast portfolio of high-end residential buildings. We handle the luxury sector exclusively. These are buildings with 24-hour concierge services, rooftop infinity pools, private wine cellars, and fitness centers that rival professional athletic facilities. I employ a dedicated team of property managers to handle the day-to-day tenant relations. However, all default files come to my private office for final legal authorization before we bring in the attorneys. My lead residential manager knocked on my glass door and handed me a thick manila folder. "We have a severe delinquency in the Azure building," he said. "The tenant in penthouse 4 is 4 months behind on rent. She keeps dodging the collection calls and sending fake wire transfer confirmation numbers to stall the accounting department. She claims her banking portal is locked, but the routing numbers she provided do not even exist. I need your signature to initiate the formal eviction process and send the file to our legal team." I opened the folder and looked at the top sheet. The name printed at the top of the ledger was Harper Jyotsna. I kept my facial expression entirely neutral. I looked at the intake forms she had submitted a year prior. She had falsified her income verification documents using a forged employment letter from a marketing agency that did not exist. She had listed our father as a secondary emergency contact, but purposefully transposed 2 digits of his phone number so the building management could never actually reach him if she defaulted. The financial ledger showed a staggering balance owed of $22,000. She was buying $12 lattes for her online followers while facing imminent legal removal from her penthouse suite. I sat in my ergonomic leather chair and traced the edge of the printed eviction notice with my index finger. The irony was almost too heavy to hold. 12 years ago, I was kicked out of my childhood home for being $150 short due to a severe lung infection. Now my sister was being kicked out of a luxury apartment for stealing $22,000 from my company to fund a fake internet persona. I could have picked up the phone right then. I could have called my parents and shattered their pristine illusion with one sentence. I could have walked into that luxury apartment building flanked by security guards and watched my sister pack her designer bags in utter disgrace. The temptation to humiliate her was a quiet hum in the back of my mind. I did none of those things. Vengeance is a poor substitute for compound interest. I did not feel rage or anger. I felt a cold, clinical sense of satisfaction. I picked up my favorite black fountain pen. I signed my initials on the bottom line of the authorization form. I closed the folder and handed it back to my manager. Proceed with the standard legal protocol, I said. Do not offer a payment plan. Do not grant an extension. Send the county sheriff when the grace period expires. My personal name is shielded by several layers of corporate entities and holding companies. Harper would receive legal notices from Sterling Management, LLC. She would communicate with a hired attorney who handled our tenant disputes. She would never know the sister she mocked as a failure was the executive who signed her removal order. I went back to reviewing my quarterly acquisition reports. I let the legal system handle her consequences. I refused to intervene and save her from the bed she had made. That eviction notice sent Harper into a desperate downward spiral. She was about to lose the physical backdrop of her fake, wealthy lifestyle. She needed a rapid influx of cash to secure a new lease somewhere else. More importantly, she needed a loud distraction to keep Richard and Diane from asking too many questions about her current living situation. She needed an event grand enough to solidify her status as the perfect, successful daughter while secretly bleeding our parents dry behind the scenes. And as the calendar turned toward their 30th wedding anniversary, Harper found her perfect scheme. She decided to orchestrate a high society gala to celebrate them. She just made one fatal logistical error when she selected the venue for the party. To understand the true nature of the trap my parents walked into, you must first understand the architecture of their chosen battleground. The Sterling estate is not merely a banquet hall. It is a fortress of exclusivity, built to separate the extraordinarily wealthy from the merely comfortable. When I purchased the property out of bankruptcy, I poured millions into the foundation. We imported crystal chandeliers from Italy. We laid seamless white marble across the grand ballroom floor. We planted rare European botanicals in the sweeping glass conservatory. Booking a single evening at the estate requires more than just a phone call. It requires a financial vetting process. It requires a non-refundable deposit that exceeds the annual salary of a typical service worker. The venue is designed to intimidate. It is designed to make people feel important simply by standing inside its walls. This is exactly why Richard and Diane Giatsna selected it. My mother considers social currency to be her primary source of oxygen. To her, a 30th wedding anniversary is not a private milestone between two spouses. It is a highly calculated theater production. She needed to assemble 200 of her most affluent acquaintances in one room. She needed to force them to witness how thriving the Giatsna family supposedly remained. Hartford society thrives on quiet rumors and whispered judgments. Diane knew her peers were always looking for cracks in the facade. She needed a blinding display of luxury to distract them from the underlying decay of her own household. She needed the perfect setting to showcase her successful Ivy League daughter and her prosperous husband. At the exact same time, my father was quietly suffocating under the weight of his own financial decisions. He had spent years liquidating his retirement portfolios to fund Harper's fake influencer lifestyle. He was draining his mutual funds to pay for her dermatological procedures and her boutique shopping habits. Yet, instead of facing reality and cutting their losses, my parents chose to double down on the illusion. They chose to host a gala they could not afford. This is the grand American tragedy of debt-fueled status. People will readily bankrupt themselves just to convince strangers they are rich. I managed my growing portfolio from a sleek corporate office located downtown. I employed a brilliant general manager named Julian to handle the daily operations of the Sterling estate. Julian dealt with the temperamental florists, the demanding caterers, and the anxious socialites. He shielded me from the exhausting trivialities of event planning. He only brought the final, binding contracts to my desk for executive authorization when the budgets exceeded a certain high-tier threshold. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Julian walked into my office holding a silver clipboard. "We just secured a full buyout for the grand ballroom next month," he said. "It is a 30th anniversary gala. The clients opted for the premium catering tier and the top-shelf open bar. The final head count is 200 guests." I extended my hand. Julian handed me the clipboard. My eyes scanned the top line of the event summary. Client names, Richard and Diane Jyotsna. I did not gasp. I did not drop my pen. My heart rate did not even elevate. I simply sat in my ergonomic leather chair and stared at the dark ink. I flipped to the second page to examine the authorization signatures. There, at the bottom of the dense legal text, was a familiar looping cursive. It was the exact same handwriting my father used to sign my yellow carbon copy rent receipts 12 years ago. I turned to the third page. Julian always attached the payment processing data for my review. The financial breakdown was staggering: $30,000. That was just the initial deposit required to reserve the date on the calendar. The final bill would easily be double that amount. I looked closely at the payment method. Richard did not write a certified check from a robust savings account. He had charged the entire $30,000 to a premium high-yield credit card. The merchant data indicated it was an account carrying a punishing 22% annual percentage rate. He was financing his own vanity on borrowed money. I let the profound irony wash over me in quiet waves. 12 years prior, this exact same man stood in a warm, fragrant kitchen and threw his youngest daughter out into the freezing New England winter. He discarded me because I fell short on my rent by $150. He claimed it was a necessary lesson in fiscal responsibility. He looked me in the eye and stated, life was not free. Now that very same man was plunging himself into crippling consumer debt. He was spending 200 times the amount that caused my homelessness just to buy a few hours of fake admiration from country club friends, people who would forget his name the moment the complimentary alcohol stopped flowing. He was going into severe debt to rent a room inside a building owned by the teenager he threw away. Julian noticed my prolonged silence. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Is there an issue with the client profile?" he asked. "I can run a deeper credit check if you feel they are a liability." I looked up at my general manager. I shook my head slowly. "The deposit cleared," I said. "Lock the date in the official calendar. Process their request exactly as outlined." I could have denied the application right then. I could have instructed Julian to refund the credit card and ban the Jyotsna family from the premises. The power to humiliate them was resting right at my fingertips. But a very old and very true proverb echoed in my mind: never interrupt someone when they are orchestrating their own downfall. I picked up my fountain pen. I signed my initials on the executive approval line. I officially rented my ballroom to my parents. The trap was fully set, though they had no idea they were walking into it. The party preparations moved forward over the following weeks. Julian handled their endless demands with professional grace. My mother requested specific arrangements of imported white roses. My father demanded a particular vintage of scotch for the head table. I monitored every single detail from a safe, invisible distance. I reviewed the catering menus and the seating charts. I watched them construct their own public execution piece by piece. I assumed the transaction would remain purely administrative until the night of the event. I planned to stay in the shadows and let the irony exist entirely in my own mind. Then it vibrated loudly, lighting up the dark room with a bright blue glow. A text message notification appeared on the screen. It was a number I had not saved in my contacts, but it was a number I had memorized a long time ago. Harper. I sat in the dim quiet of my home office, looking at the glowing screen of my phone. 8 years of total silence separated me from the number displaying at the top of the glass. 8 years of building a corporate empire from the pavement up. Harper had not reached out when I was sleeping in a freezing car. She had not called to check if my lungs recovered from pneumonia. She had never once inquired if I was safe or fed or alive. Now she was inserting herself back into my orbit. I tapped the icon to open the message string. Harper did not bother with a standard greeting. She did not ask how I was doing. Her text read like a royal decree handed down to a peasant. Lenora, Mom and Dad are celebrating their 30th anniversary next month. I am throwing them a $50,000 gala at the Sterling estate. Since you abandoned the family and caused them so much grief over the years, I think it is time you paid your fair share. I need $5,000 from you by Friday to finalize the catering. Consider it back pay for being a terrible daughter. I know you are probably still just a bartender, but Mom and Dad deserve this. Borrow it if you have to. I did not throw my phone across the room. I did not type out a furious paragraph detailing my current net worth or my status as a chief executive. I read her words a second time and let the sheer audacity wash over me. The psychology of a golden child is a fascinating study in delusion. Harper actually believed she held the moral high ground. She framed her demand as a noble crusade for our parents. She invoked a concept known as the family tax. This is the unwritten rule in toxic households, where the scapegoat is expected to endlessly compensate the favored members simply for the crime of existing. Let us dissect the specific anatomy of her message. Consider it back pay for being a terrible daughter. My chest tightened, not with sorrow, but with a cold, sharp clarity. Harper was demanding back pay. She was demanding compensation from the teenager who used to slide envelopes of crumpled diner tips under a bedroom door just to keep a roof over her head. My parents had extracted $57,600 from me in principal and compound interest over those formative years. Yet Harper believed my ledger was still in the negative. Then came the closing directive. I know you are probably still just a bartender, but Mom and Dad deserve this. Borrow it if you have to. The casual cruelty required to type those words is staggering. Harper genuinely assumed I was pouring drinks for hourly wages. She assumed I was struggling to survive. And armed with that assumption, she explicitly instructed me to take on high-interest debt to fund a luxury party. She wanted me to ruin my own hypothetical credit score so she could look like a generous benefactor in front of the Hartford Country Club elite. I set the phone down on my glass desk. I looked around my workspace. I sat in a custom ergonomic chair imported from Germany. I was currently reviewing the architectural blueprints for a commercial high-rise my firm was acquiring in the financial district. The fountain pen resting next to my phone cost more than the $5,000 she was demanding. She needed me to be poor to feel superior. But I possessed information she did not realize existed. I had the venue receipts. I knew my father paid the initial $30,000 deposit to the Sterling estate on a high-yield credit card. The contract sitting in my corporate filing cabinet proved Richard was the primary financier of this event. If Harper was suddenly demanding $5,000 to finalize the catering, it meant she had promised Richard and Diane she would cover the remaining balance. She wanted the glory of hosting the event without spending a single dime of her own non-existent money. The truth was laid bare before me. Harper was facing imminent legal eviction from a luxury penthouse. Her bank accounts were empty. Her credit lines were exhausted. She was drowning in the consequences of her own fabricated lifestyle. So she decided to extort the sister she assumed was weak and compliant. She thought she could squeeze water from a stone to keep her own illusion hydrated. The typical and perhaps healthiest response to a toxic family member attempting extortion is to enforce strict no contact. A normal person would block the number and move on with their evening. A normal person would refuse to engage with the delusion. But a predator who walks willingly into a cage should not be turned away. If I refused her demand, she would run back to Richard and Diane. She would spin a tragic tale about my selfishness. She would claim I rudely rejected an olive branch and ruined their anniversary out of spite. They would swallow the lie and comfort her, further cementing my status as the villain of the Jyotsna family. If I sent the funds, Harper would immediately transfer the cash to the venue. She would take full credit for settling the final balance. She would stand in the center of the grand ballroom wearing a designer dress and soak up the applause for being such a devoted daughter. She thought she was setting me up to be a silent, invisible victim once again. She did not realize she was handing me the final puzzle piece required to dismantle her entire fictional existence. I picked up my phone. I did not argue with her assessment of my career. I did not defend my choices. I typed a brief clinical response. Send me the wire routing information. I will transfer the $5,000 tomorrow morning. I hit send. I watched the delivery notification appear. The typing bubble on her end appeared almost instantaneously. Harper did not hesitate. She did not express surprise that a supposed bartender could produce $5,000 overnight. She just saw an easy mark falling right into line. She sent a reply containing her checking account routing numbers. Below the digits, she attached a single digital icon, a thumbs-up symbol. There was no thank you. There was no acknowledgement of the profound sacrifice she assumed I was making. There was no promise to repay the funds. It was just casual, unflinching entitlement. She believed she was entitled to my labor, to my money, and to my silence. I wrote down her routing numbers on a heavy stock corporate notepad. I tore the sheet away and placed it next to the blueprints. I had agreed to send her the cash. I was going to fulfill my end of the bargain exactly as she requested. But I was not going to let her control the narrative. Harper thought the transaction would end the moment the money hit her checking account. She thought she had successfully manipulated the system one final time. She was severely underestimating the woman on the other side of the screen. I had a much more precise method for settling the final balance at the Sterling estate. And I was going to ensure every single guest at that gala knew exactly who funded their evening. The following morning, I sit at my glass desk and open my secure banking application. I type in the routing digits Harper provided. I input the figure of $5,000. For most people, parting with that sum requires deep consideration or a lingering sense of loss. For me, it is a strategic investment in truth. I press the confirmation button. The funds transfer instantly. I do not feel any hesitation. I feel the quiet, heavy click of a steel lock snapping shut. Less than an hour later, my phone vibrates with a social media notification. I maintain an anonymous secondary account specifically to monitor Harper's digital delusions. I open the application and see a new public post at the very top of my feed. Harper uploaded a carefully filtered photograph. The image features a designer coffee cup resting against the steering wheel of her luxury sedan. The caption beneath it reads, "So blessed to fully fund my parents' dream 30th anniversary gala tonight, giving back to the people who gave me everything. Hashtag self-made. Hashtag daughter of the year." She claims my capital as her own personal triumph. She uses the money extracted from her estranged sister to purchase digital applause from strangers. Within minutes, the comment section fills with praise. My parents' country club friends leave glowing remarks about her generosity. They marvel at the successful Ivy League graduate. They validate the pristine illusion Diane worked so hard to construct. None of those commenting individuals realize the woman they are praising is currently fighting a legal removal order from her penthouse. None of them know she just begged her supposedly impoverished sibling for the catering funds. I close the social media application. I switch. The initial $30,000 deposit is properly logged, leaving a pending remaining balance of $27,000 for the premium catering, staffing, and top-shelf bar. Harper intended to use my $5,000 to pay a tiny fraction of this final bill. She likely planned to charm or manipulate my general manager into a lengthy payment plan for the rest. I refuse to grant her that opportunity. I initiate an executive override within the billing software. I adjust the outstanding $27,000 balance to zero. Under the payment authorization section, I do not list Harper. I do not list Richard. I select the option for a corporate complimentary write-off. On the electronic signature line, I type my full legal name, Lenora Jotsna, Chief Executive Officer. The system generates a final invoice displaying the zero balance alongside my authorizing executive signature. I print a physical copy on heavy, bright white cardstock. The paper slides out of the printer warm and crisp. It is a flawless, undeniable record of who actually owns this night. Now I need a proper vessel to carry my truth. I open the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk. I reach past the glossy quarterly acquisition reports and pull out a faded cardboard Nike shoebox. The edges are frayed and soft from age. I remove the lid. Inside sit 144 yellow carbon copy receipts. They represent 12 years of stolen childhood. They represent hours spent scrubbing diner floors and bagging groceries. They smell faintly of old ink and dry dust. I take them out of the box and rest them on my pristine glass desk. The contrast between the fragile yellow paper and the sleek modern environment is striking. I organize my arsenal with surgical precision. First, I compile a detailed financial spreadsheet. I list 4 years of $400 monthly payments. I calculate the principal sum of $19,200. I then apply a standard 8% annual compound interest rate covering the subsequent 8 years of my exile. The final figure lands at $57,600. I print the spreadsheet. I use a silver binder clip to attach the stack of faded yellow receipts to the top left corner. Next, I access my property management archives. I print the formal eviction notice bearing Harper's name. The document details her $22,000 rental delinquency and exposes her forged employment records. I place this legal notice directly behind the rent receipts. Then I retrieve the official state deed for the Sterling estate. The heavy legal document names my holding company and lists my signature as the sole owner of the sprawling property. I add it to the growing stack. Finally, I print the bank confirmation proving I wired Harper $5,000 that exact morning. I place the wire transfer receipt next to the zero balance venue invoice bearing my CEO authorization. I leave my office and drive to a premium stationery boutique downtown. I purchase a sleek black leather portfolio folder. The material is smooth, unyielding, and expensive. I return to my desk and arrange the printed documents inside the folder in a very specific chronological order. The rent receipts and the spreadsheet sit on top, establishing the core wound. The eviction notice sits second, exposing the fragile golden child. The property deed sits third, revealing my silent empire. The wire transfer and the venue invoice sit last, sealing the trap shut. I close the leather cover. It feels substantial in my hands. It feels like a loaded weapon. A battle of this magnitude requires proper armor. I have no intention of walking into a ballroom full of society elites wearing a traditional evening gown. I want to project undeniable authority. I schedule an appointment with a bespoke tailor. I commission a custom charcoal gray suit cut from imported Italian wool. The lines are sharp and the fit is exact. I pair the jacket with a crisp white silk button-down shirt and a minimalist silver watch. When I stand in front of the fitting room mirror, I do not see the frightened 18-year-old girl who slept shivering in a rusted Honda Civic. I see a corporate predator ready to collect a long overdue debt. The days leading up to the anniversary event feel suspended in time. Julian sends me daily operational updates regarding the gala preparations. The florists deliver hundreds of imported white roses. The catering staff polishes the champagne flutes until they gleam under the chandeliers. Richard and Diane remain entirely oblivious to the impending collision. They are busy picking out their formal attire and anticipating the envy of their peers. Harper is undoubtedly busy rehearsing a tearful, performative speech, ready to accept the unearned adoration of the entire room. They believe they are walking into a grand celebration of their flawless family legacy. They believe they successfully buried their mistakes in the past. They have no idea the architect of their luxury venue holds every single receipt. The calendar turns to Saturday. The sun sets over the manicured gardens of my estate, casting long shadows across the marble steps. I put on my charcoal suit. I pick up the black leather folder. I step into my waiting car and instruct the driver to take me to the Sterling estate. The time for silent observation is over. The drive to the Sterling estate takes 20 minutes from my downtown corporate office. My driver navigates the winding asphalt path leading toward the towering wrought iron gates. The security guard stationed in the stone entry booth recognizes my vehicle license plates immediately. He triggers the electronic heavy iron doors before my car even has to slow down. The autumn air is crisp and sharp against the tinted windows of the town car. A line of luxury vehicles stretches down the curved driveway waiting for the valet attendants. I watch the Hartford elite step out of their leased sports cars and financed utility vehicles. They hand over their keys with a practiced arrogance. I do not use the valet line. My driver pulls directly into the private executive alcove, hidden behind a tall hedge of sculpted emerald arborvitae. I step out into the cool night. I smooth the lapels of my custom charcoal gray suit. I hold the sleek black leather folder in my right hand. It is light, but it carries enough gravitational pull to shatter a 30-year marriage. I walk toward the grand entrance. The estate looms above me, a towering monument of restored stone and illuminated glass. I bought this building out of bankruptcy for 7 figures. I spent another $2 million reinforcing its foundation and importing the very white marble I am currently walking on. At the top of the sweeping grand staircase, 2 large mahogany doors stand open, welcoming the invited guests. A velvet rope creates a bottleneck where a young woman in a tailored black blazer checks names against a digital tablet. Her name is Maya. She is one of my junior event coordinators. A middle-aged couple in front of me argues politely with Maya about a missing +1 on their invitation. I bypass the velvet rope entirely and step directly up to the podium. Maya looks up, ready to deliver a polite reprimand to a line jumper. Her eyes widen for a fraction of a second when she recognizes her chief executive officer. She does not ask for my formal invitation. She does not check the digital tablet. She simply gives me a single, subtle nod and steps backward, clearing my path. The couple in line stares at me with visible confusion as I walk through the mahogany doors unhindered. They wonder who possesses that kind of unchecked access. They do not realize they are standing inside my house. The grand ballroom is a masterclass in sensory overload. 200 of my parents' closest acquaintances fill the sprawling space. The ceiling vaults 3 stories high, displaying the imported Italian crystal chandeliers I personally selected during a trip to Milan. Thousands of white roses overflow from towering silver vases, arranged meticulously on every circular dinner table. A string quartet plays an elegant classical piece near the arched conservatory windows. I installed acoustic dampening panels behind the plaster walls so the live music reverberates with perfect clarity. I stand near the edge of the polished dance floor and observe the architecture of fake wealth. The Hartford high society crowd is a fascinating ecosystem of insecurity. They smile with porcelain veneers and trade hollow compliments while secretly calculating each other's net worth. I built my fortune by exploiting this exact demographic. I sell them the illusion of exclusivity. Tonight, my parents are the prime consumers of my product. My parents designed this event to project boundless prosperity. But when you build your life scrutinizing profit margins, the cut corners become painfully obvious. I watch a uniformed waiter carry a silver tray of champagne flutes past me. The crystal glassware is rented at a premium rate to look impressive. But the liquid inside lacks the fine, persistent bubbles of a true vintage. Richard and Diane downgraded to a budget sparkling wine, hoping the dim lighting and loud music would mask the cheap taste. They are serving $12 bottles inside a venue that costs more than their combined retirement accounts. They are drowning in credit card debt to feed cheap alcohol to people who will gossip about them on the drive home. My gaze drifts through the sea of tailored tuxedos and silk evening gowns until I find the center of gravity. Harper is standing near a spectacular swan ice sculpture, holding court with a circle of our mother's country club friends. She wears a striking emerald green designer gown. The fabric drapes perfectly, indicating it was likely purchased retail on a newly opened credit card she has no intention of paying off. She tosses her head back and laughs a loud, performative sound designed to draw maximum attention. I stand still and listen to the overlapping conversations. An older woman draped in heavy pearls touches Harper's arm. The woman praises her for being such a devoted, successful daughter. She congratulates Harper for fully funding such an extravagant anniversary gift. Harper beams under the admiration. She accepts the unearned praise without a single flicker of hesitation. She nods gracefully, playing the role of the wealthy, self-made benefactor. She is currently facing a legal eviction notice from her luxury penthouse, yet she stands in my ballroom, soaking up the glory for a bill I secretly paid. I shift my focus toward the head table, situated on a raised dais at the far end of the room. Richard and Diane sit side by side. They look like aging royalty presiding over their loyal subjects. My father adjusts his silk bow tie, radiating smug satisfaction. My mother sips her budget champagne and smiles at a passing guest. Then my father's eyes sweep across the dance floor and land directly on me. The physical reaction is instantaneous and severe. Richard freezes. His smile collapses into a tight grimace. He lowers his glass so fast, the liquid sloshes over the crystal rim and spills onto his tuxedo trousers. Diane notices his sudden rigidity. She follows his line of sight. When her eyes meet mine, the color drains from her carefully powdered face. They are looking at a phantom. The last time they saw me, I was an 18-year-old girl wearing a cheap winter coat, dragging garbage bags down a freezing sidewalk. Today, I am a 26-year-old executive, standing in a bespoke charcoal suit, radiating cold authority. They do not know how I found them. They do not know why I am here. They only know that my presence violates the pristine narrative they spent over a decade constructing. Before they can recover from the shock, Harper spots me. Her eyes dart around the room, frantically checking to see if anyone is watching us. Her manicured nails dig into her expensive silk clutch. She excuses herself from her circle of admirers and marches across the ballroom floor. Her emerald gown swishes around her ankles. Her face twists into a mask of pure panic and raw disdain. She stops 2 feet in front of me, blocking my clear path to the head table. She leans in close so the other guests cannot hear her. Her voice is a frantic, venomous hiss. "Who let you in?" she demands. "You are not on the guest list. You need to turn around and walk out that door right now before you ruin everything." I do not break eye contact. I do not raise my voice. I simply look at the sister who told me to grow up while I slept in a rusted car. I look at the woman who demanded $5,000 to cover a bill she could not pay. I let a slow, icy smile spread across my face. I tighten my grip on the black leather folder, and I prepare to step right past her toward the microphone. Harper tries to maintain her blockade, but the sharp chime of a silver spoon tapping against a crystal flute interrupts her. The master of ceremonies stands near the raised dais, adjusting his crisp tuxedo jacket. He asks the guests to please direct their attention to the front of the room. The scheduled time for formal toasts has officially arrived. Harper realizes she cannot cause a public scene without drawing the scrutiny of 200 high society gossips. She shoots me a look of pure venom, spins on her expensive heels, and hurries toward the stage. She has a highly anticipated performance to deliver. I remain standing near the outer edge of the polished dance floor. I blend into the periphery, acting as a silent observer in a charcoal suit, watching the theater unfold. The grand ballroom quiets down. The string quartet finishes their classical arrangement and fades into silence. Uniformed waiters step back and stand at strict attention against the perimeter walls, holding silver trays of untouched champagne. The master of ceremonies beams into the microphone. He praises the enduring love and commitment of Richard and Diane Jyotsna. He speaks about their legacy in the Hartford community. Then he turns and introduces the primary sponsor of the evening. He presents the devoted and highly successful eldest daughter, Harper. Harper steps up to the wooden podium. She adjusts her posture, projecting a flawless image of humility and grace. She grips the sides of the stand with her manicured hands. She looks out over the crowd and smiles a fragile, beautiful smile. She begins to speak. Her voice is a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She talks about the deep core values our parents instilled in us from a very young age. She speaks about the virtues of hard work, discipline, and fiscal responsibility. Hearing those specific words from a woman currently facing a legal removal order for $22,000 in unpaid rent is a profound experience. It is a stunning display of psychological projection. She claims her thriving career in the competitive art and marketing sectors taught her everything she knows about giving back to the people who matter most. Then Harper delivers the grand centerpiece of her fiction. She gestures gracefully, sweeping her arm toward the vaulted glass ceilings and the imported Italian crystal chandeliers. She announces to the room that fully funding this extravagant gala was the absolute least she could do. She claims every white rose on every table, every bottle of sparkling wine, and every hour of live music is her personal gift to the parents who sacrificed so much for her elite Ivy League education. She pauses for dramatic effect and squeezes out a single glistening tear. The droplet catches the ambient amber lighting perfectly as it rolls down her cheek. The audience reacts exactly as programmed. They swoon. They murmur their deep, profound approval. Wealthy women dab their eyes with silk napkins. Older men nod in solemn respect. They see a triumphant daughter, honoring her prosperous lineage. They are witnessing the ultimate validation of the Jyotsna family parenting strategy. I look up at the head table. Richard sits taller, his chest puffing out beneath his tailored jacket. He believes his immense financial gamble finally paid off. He assumes Harper actually stepped up and covered the massive remaining venue balance just as she promised. He thinks she saved him from a catastrophic credit default. Diane reaches out and holds his hand, presenting the picture of a flawless matriarch who raised a flawless child. They are all trapped inside a shared delusion. Harper used my $5,000 wire transfer to convince them she settled the account. She took full public credit for a $27,000 corporate write-off authorized exclusively by my hand. She is accepting a standing ovation for spending my money inside a building I legally own. Harper finishes her speech to thunderous applause. She steps away from the podium and walks toward the head table. Richard stands up and embraces her in a tight, proud hug. Diane leans over and kisses her cheek. The master of ceremonies returns to the microphone, smiling broadly at the display of family affection. He asks if anyone else has a few words to share before the dinner service officially begins. The room expects silence. They expect the waiters to begin carrying out the roasted tenderloin and seasonal vegetables. Instead, I take a step forward. My leather dress shoes click against the polished marble floor. The sound is sharp, cutting through the fading applause. I walk past the front row of circular dining tables. The guests seated nearby turn their heads. Their expressions shift rapidly from polite curiosity to visible confusion. They see a young woman in a sharp gray suit walking with intense, deliberate purpose. Some of the older guests narrow their eyes, recognizing the underlying facial structure of a teenager they have not seen in nearly a decade. Whispers begin to ripple through the crowd like a current of electricity passing from table to table. Harper turns around. Her triumphant smile evaporates instantly. Her eyes widen in stark, unadulterated terror. She realizes I am not just a spectator hiding in the shadows. Richard, I carry the black leather folder in my right hand, resting it gently against my side. I reach the wooden podium. The master of ceremonies looks at me uncertainly, but my cold demeanor leaves no room for debate. I step into his physical space, and he instinctively steps backward, yielding the floor to me. I stand behind the microphone. I look out over the 200 faces staring back at me. I see their quiet judgments, their confusion, and the sudden tension tightening the air. The ballroom becomes so silent, you could hear a pin drop onto the marble tiles. I reach up and adjust the microphone stand. The metallic click echoes sharply through the state-of-the-art sound system. I do not look at Harper. I lock my gaze directly onto my father. I do not scream. I do not raise my voice in anger. Emotional outbursts cost margin, and I operate on pure profit. My voice is perfectly steady, resonant, and clinical. I also brought a gift, I say. The sound fills the cavernous room, bouncing off the acoustic dampening panels. I watch Richard swallow hard, his throat bobbing above his bow tie. A return on an investment my parents started when I was 14. Let me pause right here and speak directly to you. If you think my parents are about to apologize, you have not been paying attention to the mechanics of a toxic household. A family built on appearances does not surrender their narrative easily. They will fight the truth until the very bitter end. Drop 333 in the comments if you are ready for the folder to open. I want to see who is staying until the final receipt is collected. I step away from the wooden podium. I do not say another word into the microphone. The silence that follows my brief speech is heavier than poured concrete. I walk toward the raised dais where the head table sits overlooking the ballroom. Harper tries to intercept me. She takes a frantic step forward, her hands reaching out to grab my arm and stop my momentum. But she hesitates. She realizes 200 pairs of eyes are watching her every twitch. If she attacks me, the pristine socialite facade shatters in front of her peers. She pulls her hands back, her chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths. She is paralyzed by her own desperate need to maintain appearances. I ascend the 3 carpeted stairs leading up to the dais. I stand directly in front of Richard Jyotsna. He looks up at me. His eyes are wide, searching my face for a hint of the frightened teenager he discarded into the winter cold. He finds nothing but a corporate predator looking back at him. He sees the bespoke suit. He sees the expensive minimalist watch on my wrist. He sees a woman who does not need his approval or his money to exist. I raise my right hand. I hold the sleek black leather folder out over the crisp white tablecloth. The leather is smooth and unyielding under my fingers. Inside that cover are the faded yellow carbon copies, the legal eviction notice, the property deed, and the wire transfer confirmation. I lower my arm and place the folder directly onto his pristine dinner plate. It lands with a soft, definitive thud against the fine china. I take one step back. I fold my hands neatly in front of me. I wait for him to open it. The black leather folder rests on the fine bone china plate. It sits directly between a polished silver dinner fork and a crystal water goblet. The juxtaposition is stark. A corporate dossier placed in the center of a high society banquet. For several agonizing seconds, nobody at the head table moves. The entire ballroom seems to hold a collective breath. 200 affluent guests sit in total silence, watching the drama unfold on the raised dais. Richard stares at the dark leather cover. His mind is frantically trying to categorize the object. He expects an anniversary card. He expects a printed photograph or perhaps a pair of expensive airline tickets. he does not expect a legal portfolio from the daughter he discarded 12 years ago. His hands rest flat on the white linen tablecloth. I observe the soft manicured skin of his fingers. He has never worked a day of manual labor in his life. He has never scrubbed a commercial grill or bagged groceries to avoid losing his bed. Slowly, he reaches out. His right hand grasps the edge of the leather cover. He flips it open. The first page is a pristine white spreadsheet printed on heavy corporate cardstock. I designed the document with immaculate precision. The rows and columns are aligned perfectly, presenting a ruthless accounting of my adolescence. Richard looks at the top row. The header reads, Jyotsna Residential Lease Agreement Ledger. His eyes track downward, scanning the columns. He sees 48 distinct line items. Each line represents a single month of my high school existence. Each line lists an exact payment of $400. At the bottom of the first column, a bold sum calculates the principal amount extracted from a 14-year-old girl, $19,200. But I did not stop at the principal. Richard fancied himself a financial traditionalist who understood the time value of money. So I applied a standard 8% annual compound interest rate covering the 8 years since my eviction. I formatted the interest accrual in a secondary column, showing how the debt multiplied during my exile. The final grand total sits at the bottom right corner of the page, circled in black ink. $57,600. Pinned to the top left corner of this spreadsheet is a thick stack of faded yellow paper. These are the original carbon copy rent receipts. They are frayed at the edges. They carry the faint smell of dust and the cramped basement where I lived after sleeping in my car. Richard stares at the top receipt. He recognizes the familiar blue ink of his own silver ballpoint pen. He recognizes his own looping signature confirming he collected cash from a child. His fingers begin to tremble. The tremor starts in his knuckles and travels up his wrist, causing the heavy cardstock to vibrate against the porcelain plate. He realizes this is not a prank. This is a meticulously documented historical record of his cruelty. Diane leans over his shoulder to see what has paralyzed her husband. My mother always curated her environment with obsessive control. She spent her entire adult life burying ugly truths beneath expensive rugs. Now the ugliest truth she ever produced is sitting under the bright chandelier light for everyone to see. She reads the final number on the spreadsheet. The blood drains from her face, leaving her skin a pale ashen gray. Her heavy pearl necklace clinks softly against the edge of the table as she slumps backward into her chair. Richard turns the first page. His breathing turns shallow and rapid. The second layer of the folder contains the official state deed for the Sterling estate. The document is stamped with the county clerk's seal. It features dense legal paragraphs detailing the transfer of the sprawling multi-million-dollar property out of bankruptcy and into a private holding company. Richard reads the bottom line, where the sole ownership is explicitly declared. Lenora Jyotsna, Chief Executive Officer. He blinks rapidly, trying to process the legal text. The man who lectured me about the harsh realities of the real world is currently standing inside a building I own. He is sitting at a table I purchased. He is drinking wine served by staff whose paychecks bear my signature. The power dynamic shifts so abruptly it leaves him visibly dizzy. He looks up at me, his mouth opening slightly, but no words emerge. The strict patriarch has been reduced to a silent, confused tenant. He turns the page one more time. The third layer contains the final venue invoice alongside a printed wire transfer confirmation. Richard sees the zero balance on the anniversary gala bill. He sees the complimentary corporate write-off authorized by my executive signature. Right beside it, he sees the banking receipt, proving I wired Harper $5,000 this very morning. The fictional narrative Harper spent weeks spinning collapses in an instant. Richard realizes his golden child did not pay for this extravagant party. He realizes she begged her estranged sister for the catering funds, and then lied to his face, taking full credit for a $27,000 corporate favor. He realizes the daughter he financed with $180,000 in tuition is a broke, manipulative fraud. I do not wait for him to find his voice. I am not here to engage in a debate. I am here to close an account. I project my voice. I speak with a clear, resonant tone, ensuring the sound carries past the head table and reaches the front rows of the dining area. The affluent guests sitting nearby lean forward, hanging on every single syllable. You charge me $57,600 to survive my childhood, I say. The words cut through the dead silence of the ballroom. I point a single finger at the black leather folder. Consider tonight your final rent payment. We are officially even. The impact of the statement ripples across the room. I watch the jaws of several country club matriarchs drop open. The people who praised Diane for her impeccable parenting are now calculating the math. They are realizing the Jyotsna family extorted their youngest child to fund their lavish lifestyle. The pristine social facade shatters into 1,000 unrecoverable pieces. Harper watches the exchange from a few feet away. She sees the folder resting on the table. She hears my public declaration. Her survival instinct overrides her fragile socialite persona. She knows that if those documents circulate among the guests, her reputation will be permanently destroyed. She will be exposed as an unemployed debtor who faked her own success. Panic twists her features into a desperate snarl. She lunges forward. Her emerald green designer gown twists around her legs as she reaches across the white tablecloth, aiming to snatch the black leather folder right off the porcelain plate. She intends to tear the documents into pieces to destroy the evidence of her extortion and her eviction. She never reaches the leather cover. A tall man wearing a discreet black suit steps out of the shadows near the service corridor. His name is Marcus. He is the head of private security for Sterling Management. He moves with swift, fluid precision. He steps directly between Harper and the head table, intercepting her frantic charge. Marcus raises a single, open palm, blocking her path without utilizing excessive force. "Ma'am, please step back," he says. His voice is deep, polite, and entirely unyielding. Harper crashes into his outstretched arm. She recoils, gasping in shock. She is accustomed to having her demands met without friction. She has never faced a physical boundary she could not manipulate or cry her way through. She looks up at Marcus, her eyes wide with frantic indignation. "He works for me," I tell her, keeping my tone icy and detached. "And you are currently causing a disturbance on my property." The guests in the front row audibly gasp. The realization washes over the crowd. The teenage outcast did not just crash the party, she owns the entire estate. Harper stands frozen, facing the immovable wall of my security detail. She looks down at the folder, still resting safely on the table. She looks at Richard, who is staring at her with a terrifying mixture of betrayal and profound financial dread. For her entire existence, she relied on a single survival mechanism. Whenever reality threatened her privileged status, she deflected the blame onto me. If she scratched our mother's car, she told them I left a bicycle in the driveway. If she failed an exam, she claimed my loud music ruined her concentration. Now, standing in front of the Hartford elite, she reverts directly to that familiar childhood script. She spins around to face the crowded tables. Her emerald gown flares around her ankles. She points a trembling finger toward the dais. "This is fake," she screams. Her voice echoes across the vaulted ceiling, shrill and desperate. "My sister forged these documents. She has always been jealous of me. She is trying to ruin my night." The accusation hangs in the humid air. Harper, his eyes remain glued to the black leather folder resting on his dinner plate. The guests seated near the front row exchange uncomfortable glances. The low hum of whispered conversations begins to ripple through the ballroom. A woman sitting at table 4 leans toward her husband. Her eyes dart from Harper's frantic expression to my calm, tailored silhouette. I hear the distinct rustle of silk as guests shift in their velvet chairs. Someone murmurs a question about the $22,000 eviction notice. Another guest whispers about the property deed. The carefully constructed social facade Diane spent 3 decades polishing is splintering in real time. Harper realizes her usual tactic is failing. The crowd is not buying her performance. She turns back toward the head table. "Dad," she pleads, "tell them to throw her out. Tell them she is lying." Before Richard can process her demand, a new voice fills the room. Julian, my general manager, steps onto the edge of the stage. He adjusts the lapels of his immaculate tuxedo. He walks directly to the wooden podium I recently vacated. He leans toward the microphone. He gestures toward me with an open palm. The gesture is formal and deferential. "Please allow me to introduce the sole proprietor of this venue and the chief executive officer of Sterling Management." Julian continues, "Ms. Lenora Jyotsna." She personally authorized the complimentary waiver for tonight's remaining catering balance. Any security directives she issues are final and binding. The verbal confirmation acts as a finishing blow. It removes any lingering doubt from the minds of the 200 spectators. The documents are not forgeries. The high school outcast did not sneak into the party. She owns the kingdom. Harper shrinks backward, her shoulders round forward, collapsing her proud posture. The sudden loss of leverage is a physical weight pressing her down toward the marble tiles. She opens her mouth to speak, but her throat produces no sound. For the first time in her life, she possesses no script. She has run out of wealthy admirers to manipulate and parental bank accounts to drain. I shift my attention back to the patriarch of the Jyotsna family. Richard finally peels his eyes away from the corporate portfolio. He lifts his head. He looks at his eldest daughter standing defeated near the ice sculpture. Then he looks at me. I watch the complex machinery of his pride suffer a catastrophic structural failure. He is a man who spent his entire adulthood lecturing others about personal responsibility. He justified his cruelty by claiming it built character. Now he faces the undeniable math of his own decisions. He spent $180,000 funding an Ivy League education for a woman who forged employment records and defaulted on a luxury penthouse. He financed her cosmetic procedures while she secretly accumulated staggering debt. He bankrupted his own retirement to support a grifter. Simultaneously, he realizes the child he evicted over a minor financial shortfall utilized his harsh lessons to build an empire. He forced me to understand the ruthless nature of contracts. I used that knowledge to acquire commercial districts. He demanded strict accounting. I used those skills to structure a multi-million-dollar holding company. He taught me how to survive without a safety net. I survived so well, I eventually purchased the net itself. The realization crashes into him with devastating force. He traded a thriving executive for a fraudulent socialite. Richard reaches up and rubs his forehead. His fingers tremble against his graying temples. He looks down at the faded yellow rent receipts scattered across his porcelain plate. He touches the frayed edge of the paper from December, 12 years ago. He traces his own signature. He begins to weep. He does not sob loudly. He does not wail or seek comfort from his wife. He cries silently. Tears spill over his lower eyelids and track down his weathered cheeks, dropping onto the stiff collar of his tuxedo shirt. It is the grief of a man recognizing a mistake he can never undo. He alienated his only successful offspring to protect an illusion that just evaporated under the chandelier lights. Diane sits beside him. The matriarch who valued social currency above maternal instinct is frozen in a state of profound shock. Her eyes dart wildly around the room. She sees her country club peers whispering behind their hands. She sees the pity and the judgment radiating from the dining tables. The status she craved so desperately is gone. She will be the primary subject of local gossip for the next decade. Harper takes one trembling step toward the head table. "Mom," she whispers. Her voice is a hollow rasp. Please. Diane does not reach out to comfort her favored child. She turns her head away. She stares blankly at a centerpiece of imported white roses. The enabling mechanism is broken. The mother who always rushed to shield her golden daughter finally realizes the shield itself was a lie. I stand near the edge of the stage observing the ruins of my former household. I do not feel a triumphant surge of adrenaline. I do not feel the urge to gloat or deliver a lengthy villainous monologue. I feel an icy, clinical resolution. The ledger is balanced. The truth is no longer buried beneath the floorboards of their Hartford home. It is resting in plain sight. I turn my back on the head table. I signal to Marcus with a brief nod. The security chief steps aside, clearing a path for my departure. My work in this ballroom is finished. The consequences of their actions belong entirely to them now. But as I take my first step toward the grand mahogany doors, a sudden, sharp sound echoes across the dance floor. It is the sound of shattering glass. Someone at the head table just knocked over a crystal water goblet. The tension in the room snaps. The true aftermath of the revelation is about to begin. The sharp sound of shattering crystal echoes across the raised dais. My mother just dropped her water goblet. The delicate stemware hits the edge of her dinner plate and fractures into dozens of jagged pieces. Ice cubes scatter across the white linen tablecloth, pooling freezing water around the black leather folder. Diane does not flinch. She does not reach for a napkin to stem the spreading tide. Her manicured hands grip the edge of the table as she forces herself to stand. Her knees are trembling so severely that the heavy wooden chair scrapes loudly against the hardwood floor. For 26 years, my mother functioned as the ultimate curator of our family narrative. She expertly pruned away any unsightly branches to ensure the Jyotsna family tree looked pristine to outside observers. I was the unsightly branch she pruned with a pair of financial shears when I was a teenager. She spent over a decade pretending I simply chose a life of rebellion. Now she is standing in a ballroom I own, facing the undeniable proof that her favored daughter is a fraud and her discarded daughter is a titan. Diane ignores Harper, who is still shrinking away from my security chief. She bypasses my father, who remains catatonic, staring at the faded yellow rent receipts. She descends the 3 carpeted stairs of the dais with clumsy, uneven steps. Her heavy pearl necklace swings erratically against her chest. She reaches the polished dance floor and moves toward me. Her eyes are brimming with sudden, desperate tears. They are not tears of genuine maternal regret. I spent enough years studying human behavior in high-stakes boardrooms to recognize the precise anatomy of a panic response. She is crying because the social currency she hoarded her entire life is burning to ash in front of 200 spectators. She needs to bridge the chasm between us immediately to salvage her public image. She needs the country club elite to see a touching reconciliation rather than a permanent severing of ties. "Lenora, please," she whispers. Her voice cracks. She reaches both arms out, extending her hands toward my shoulders. We did not know. I look at her outstretched fingers. I do not feel a sudden surge of unresolved childhood longing. I do not feel the urge to fall into her embrace and weep. The part of my brain that used to crave her affection scarred over during those 19 days I spent freezing in a rusted Honda Civic. The tissue there is dead and unyielding. I take one deliberate step backward. The physical boundary is subtle but impenetrable. I place myself securely out of her reach. My mother grasps at empty air. Her hands drop to her sides heavily. The rejection lands like a physical blow, causing her shoulders to hunch forward. "You knew exactly what you were doing when I was 14, Mom," I say. My voice is level and smooth, devoid of any jagged, emotional edges. "You knew what you were doing when I came up short on my rent due to a lung infection. You knew what you were doing when you watched me pack my life into garbage bags." Diane opens her mouth to formulate a defense, but her throat closes. There is no defense available. She cannot claim ignorance regarding my eviction. She cannot claim she was unaware of the $400 monthly payments. She endorsed the cruelty because it served her need for domestic order. She only claims she did not know because she is horrified by the current financial consequences. She is apologizing to a chief executive officer, not to her daughter. Enjoy the party, I tell her. My gaze sweeps past her, taking in the stunned faces of the guests seated at the surrounding tables. The premium catering service will begin shortly. The open bar is fully funded. Please stay and celebrate your anniversary. My staff will clean up the mess. I turn my back on the matriarch of the Jyotsna family. I do not wait for a rebuttal. I do not stick around to field a tearful monologue from a woman who lacks the foundational courage to face her own reflections. This is the true power of walking away. A toxic dynamic requires two active participants to sustain its momentum. If I stayed to argue, I would validate their delusion. I would provide them with a target for their shame. Harper would eventually find her voice and attempt to spin the narrative framing me as a cruel, vindictive saboteur. Richard would recover his temper and try to assert his fading patriarchal authority. Diane would continue weeping to generate sympathy from her peers. By turning my back and walking toward the exit, I deny them their essential catharsis. I leave them trapped alone inside the radioactive fallout of their own terrible choices. They must sit at that head table and chew on the ashes of their reputation, while 200 former admirers watch them choke. I walk down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. My spine is perfectly straight. My custom charcoal suit moves with crisp, flawless tailoring. The sea of Hartford high society parts for me like a retreating tide. Guests pull their chairs closer to the tables, ensuring they do not block my path. I recognize several faces in the crowd as I pass. I see the mother of a former high school classmate who used to ignore me when I refilled her coffee cup at the diner. I see a commercial loan officer who denied my first small business application years ago, claiming I lacked sufficient collateral. Today they look at me with a potent mixture of raw awe and genuine fear. They recognize they are standing in the presence of an apex predator who remembers every slight and keeps every receipt. I reach the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the room. Julian is standing near the threshold, holding a silver clipboard. He steps aside and offers a crisp, respectful bow as I pass. I give him a brief nod of acknowledgement. The security detail will ensure the black leather folder remains on the head table until my father finishes digesting the mathematics of his ruin. Marcus will prevent Harper from destroying the evidence. I cross the marble foyer and step out through the main entrance. The crisp autumn air hits my face feeling clean and sharp after the stifling, perfumed atmosphere of the ballroom. The string quartet music fades away, replaced by the quiet hum of the night wind rustling through the sculpted arborvitae hedges. The valet attendants stand at strict attention near the circular driveway. My private driver is already waiting adjacent to the stone fountain. He opens the rear passenger door of the town car as I approach. I slide onto the plush leather seat and wait for him to close the door, shutting out the remnants of my past. The engine idles with a smooth, powerful vibration. I lean back against the headrest and look through the tinted window at the glowing facade of the Sterling estate. The sprawling mansion looks magnificent against the dark sky. It is a monument to survival, built on a foundation of discarded carbon copies. I close my eyes and breathe. I do not feel victorious in the traditional sense. Triumphs usually involve cheering crowds and shared celebrations. My victory is solitary, cold, and precise. I built a fortress strong enough to withstand any external force. I learned the hard way that you do not have to set yourself on fire to keep your family warm. Sometimes the most profound act of self-preservation is simply building your own house and letting them realize they do not possess a key. The town car shifts into gear and begins the smooth descent down the winding asphalt driveway, leaving the iron gates behind. The quiet interior of the vehicle offers a rare moment of total sanctuary. But the silence is temporary. The shockwave I just detonated inside that ballroom is expanding rapidly. The initial blast leveled their pristine social standing, but the secondary tremors are about to tear through their financial reality. As the car merges onto the dark highway heading back toward the city, my personal cell phone illuminates the shadowy cabin. The screen glows brightly, resting on the leather seat next to me. The notification chime slices through the quiet. The incoming caller identification displays a familiar name. It is the first of many desperate attempts. The illusion is dead, but the panic is just waking up. The illuminated screen of my personal cellular device casts a harsh, blue glare across the dark leather interior of the town car. I look down at the incoming caller identification. The name displayed is Richard Jyotsna. He is calling mere minutes after I exited the grand ballroom. I do not answer the prompt. I press a single button on the side of the device to mute the incoming transmission. The screen goes dark for exactly 3 seconds before lighting up again. The second attempt originates from Diane. I silence her call as well. By the time my private driver navigates the vehicle onto the interstate highway, heading back toward the downtown financial district, 4 unknown numbers attempt to breach my perimeter. The panic has officially escaped the confines of the Sterling estate and is now actively seeking a target. I arrive at my corporate headquarters early the following Monday morning. The sleek, high-rise building stands as a silent monument to order and precision. I step out of the private elevator and walk through the glass double doors of my executive suite. My lead administrative assistant, Anna, greets me from her polished reception desk. She holds a digital scheduling tablet in her hands. Her expression remains highly professional, but her eyes convey a distinct sense of urgency. She informs me that the private office switchboard received 20 separate voicemails over the weekend. They all originated from the exact same 2 individuals. Furthermore, my secure corporate email inbox currently holds over a dozen frantic messages bearing my father's electronic signature. I do not break my stride as I walk toward my inner office. I instruct Anna to archive every single audio file without listening to the contents. I tell her to route all incoming text-based communications from those specific email addresses into a hidden subfolder. I do not need to hear the frantic rationalizations of people who just watched their social standing turn to ash. I require a sterile working environment to conduct my daily operations. While I focus on acquiring new commercial logistics centers, the Hartford social ecosystem begins to process the spectacular implosion of the Jyotsna family. High society operates with the ruthless efficiency of a predatory organism. By Tuesday morning, the intricate details of the anniversary gala circulate through every exclusive dining room and charity board meeting in the county. Affluent people do not keep secrets when the scandal involves fabricated wealth. Harper experiences the brutal velocity of a high society excommunication. Her wealthy acquaintances stop returning her messages. They cancel long-standing brunch reservations without offering alternative dates. They unfollow her carefully curated social media profiles in droves. A lifestyle influencer without actual capital is simply a social liability. No one wants to be photographed standing next to a fraud. The consequences manifest in the physical world by Thursday morning. The county sheriff arrives at the Azure luxury building exactly as my legal department scheduled. The eviction order is executed with cold, bureaucratic precision. Harper is forced to pack her designer wardrobe into cheap cardboard boxes, while the building concierge watches from the lobby desk. She loses the spectacular skyline views and the rooftop infinity pool. Stripped of her penthouse, she has nowhere else to go. She must return to the suburbs. She drags her cardboard boxes back into the childhood bedroom I used to pay $400 a month to occupy. The return of the disgraced golden child brings the ultimate financial reckoning directly to my parents' doorstep. Richard and Diane can no longer hide behind their comforting delusions. They are forced to spread their accounting ledgers across the very same kitchen table where my father once drafted a lease agreement for a 14-year-old girl. The mathematics of their ruin are stubborn and exact. The mutual funds are entirely depleted. The retirement portfolios are thoroughly drained. The high-yield credit cards are stretched far beyond their maximum approved limits. They spent their entire financial safety net funding a shimmering illusion. They purchased expensive cars and luxury vacations to convince their peers they were thriving. Now the creditors demand their rightful compensation. To satisfy these crushing debt obligations, my parents must take the one action Diane fears more than any other consequence. They must list their pristine Hartford residence for sale. The manicured lawns, the formal dining room, the neighborhood prestige, they have to surrender. All of it. They must downsize to a modest condominium in a significantly less desirable zip code just to avoid declaring total bankruptcy. The ultimate irony is that their desperate pursuit of high status guarantees their permanent expulsion from the upper class. The sheer weight of this reality prompts another relentless wave of communication attempts. Anna continues to intercept the incoming barrage. She provides me with brief clinical summaries at the end of each business day. The subject lines of the intercepted emails escalate from polite requests for a brief conversation to desperate pleas for family unity. Richard and Diane want me to fix the disaster they engineered. They assume my vast accumulated capital can function as a magical eraser, wiping away their poor decisions. They believe I owe them a rescue simply because we share genetic material. I ignore every single inquiry. I maintain a posture of total silence. Forgiveness is not a fundamental human entitlement. It is a complex transaction requiring structural, painful accountability. You do not get to shatter a teenager, cast her into the freezing winter, and then demand a financial rescue from the titan she became. True accountability requires sitting alone in the dark with the wreckage of your own choices. I refuse to offer them a premature exit from their suffering. I force them to endure the agonizing silence of a closed door. 2 full weeks pass without any direct contact. The digital flood eventually slows to a trickle as they realize the electronic channels are sealed. Then a physical object breaches my corporate defenses. Anna walks into my office carrying a standard white envelope. It lacks a return address, but I recognize the looping cursive handwriting instantly. It is the exact same penmanship that filled out those yellow carbon receipts so many years ago. Anna places the envelope onto my glass desk and steps out of the room quietly. I pick up a heavy steel letter opener. I slice the top edge of the paper open. I pull out a single sheet of lined stationery. Richard did not write a lengthy manifesto. He did not offer empty excuses or attempt to blame Harper for his own complicity. The tone of the writing lacks his usual arrogant bluster. He wrote exactly 2 sentences. The first sentence reads, "I failed you in every measurable way a father could possibly fail a daughter." The second sentence echoes across 12 years of unyielding silence. "Life is not free, and I am currently paying the price." I rest the paper flat against the cold glass surface of my desk. I study the ink. The phrasing is a direct callback to the kitchen table lecture he delivered when I was a child. He finally understands the harsh economic principles he weaponized against me. He recognizes the terrible debt he accrued. He is trapped in a prison of his own design, and he acknowledges I hold the only key. The letter does not erase the 19 days I spent shivering in a rusted vehicle. It does not magically repair the dead tissue in my chest where a daughter's love used to reside. But it signifies a fundamental shift in the power dynamic. The strict patriarch is no longer dictating the terms of reality. He is submitting to them. The fallout has reached its maximum natural conclusion. Harper is stripped of her fake prestige and her stolen luxury. Richard and Diane are stripped of their unearned status and their financial security. The architecture of their toxic household is completely demolished, leaving them exposed to the harsh elements of the real world. Leaving them wandering in the ruins forever would be easy. I could throw the letter into the shredder and return to my acquisition reports. But leaving them in perpetual limbo would also leave a loose end in my immaculate ledger. I prefer closed accounts. I prefer clearly defined borders. I press the silver intercom button on my desk console. Anna answers immediately. I instruct her to draft a formal calendar invitation. I tell her to send it to my father's email address. I require her to reserve a neutral conference room on the ground floor of our corporate building for tomorrow afternoon. The time for silent observation has expired. The time for setting the final iron boundary has arrived. The meeting I scheduled for that Tuesday afternoon lasted exactly 4 minutes. I walked into the ground floor conference room where my parents sat waiting. I did not offer them a beverage. I did not sit down in the ergonomic leather chair opposite them. I simply slid a single printed sheet of paper across the polished mahogany table. The document contained a brief list of non-negotiable prerequisites. They were required to liquidate their primary residence. They were required to settle their outstanding consumer debt. They were required to permanently sever all financial support to my sister. I told them if they successfully executed those 3 directives, I would grant them a formal conversation in exactly 6 months. Then I turned around and walked out of the room. 6 months is a profound metric of time when you are forced to dismantle your entire identity. I monitored their progress through public real estate records and quiet industry channels. They actually followed my instructions. The pristine Hartford estate hit the market by the end of that week. They priced the property below market value, indicating a desperate need for rapid liquidation to appease their creditors. A young corporate executive purchased the house 30 days later. Richard and Diane packed their curated lives into cardboard boxes and relocated to a modest 2-bedroom condominium located in a working-class neighborhood near the regional airport. They surrendered their country club memberships. They vanished from the charity gala circuits. Harper experienced the most severe atmospheric re-entry. Cut off from the endless parental subsidies, she could no longer afford her curated digital aesthetic. She faced a brutal collision with the American job market. Armed with an art history degree and a resume featuring a fabricated marketing position, she possessed zero leverage. She eventually secured employment as a shift supervisor at a mid-tier retail clothing store inside a suburban shopping mall. She spends her days folding denim inventory and dealing with disgruntled customers under harsh fluorescent lighting. She lives in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates. The golden child was finally forced to join the working class she used to mock. The 6-month probationary period expired on a rainy Thursday morning in late spring. I instructed my assistant Anna to escort Richard and Diane up to my executive suite. I chose the primary corporate boardroom for this encounter. The space features a long rectangular glass table flanked by 12 austere chairs. The room is designed for hostile acquisitions and complex corporate mergers. It is devoid of warmth or sentimentality. I sat at the head of the table. The panoramic windows behind me framed the sweeping gray skyline of the financial district. The heavy oak doors opened. My parents walked into the room. They looked remarkably small. The arrogant bluster that defined my father for 3 decades was missing. He wore a simple beige sweater instead of his usual tailored suits. He looked aged. The deep lines around his mouth suggested he had spent the last half-year clenching his jaw against the crushing weight of reality. My mother walked quietly beside him. She carried a generic leather handbag rather than her signature designer purse. The performative matriarch who thrived on social validation was gone. In her place stood a tired woman who finally realized her superficial kingdom was built on sand. They sat in the 2 chairs positioned at the far opposite end of the long glass table. The physical distance stretching between us mirrored the emotional chasm we needed to navigate. I did not offer a polite greeting. I folded my hands together, resting them on the cool glass surface. I waited for them to speak. Richard cleared his throat. The sound was rough and uncertain. "We sold the house," he said. "We paid off the credit lines. Harper is managing her own expenses now." I nodded slowly, acknowledging the factual accuracy of his report. "Executing basic financial responsibility is an expectation, not an achievement," I replied. "You do not get a trophy for cleaning up a disaster you funded." Diane looked down at her lap. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the fabric of her skirt. "We know that, Lenora," she whispered. "We lost everything trying to protect an image. We lost you. We want to know how to fix it." I reached into the pocket of my blazer. I retrieved a thick, pristine white business card. I placed it on the table and pushed it forward. The card glided across the smooth glass, stopping perfectly in front of my father. Fixing this requires structural intervention, I told them. That is the contact information for a renowned clinical psychologist. She specializes in narcissistic family dynamics and chronic financial enabling. My terms for any future relationship are ironclad. You will both attend individual therapy sessions twice a month. You will sign a release form allowing the therapist to confirm your attendance with my legal team. Furthermore, you will provide my accounting department with full financial transparency. I require quarterly bank statements to verify you are not secretly funneling capital back to Harper. Richard picked up the business card. He studied the printed text. He did not argue against the invasive nature of my demands. He did not cite his parental authority or demand respect. He simply placed the card into his breast pocket and offered a solemn nod of agreement. He understood I was treating them like a high-risk corporate subsidiary. It was the only language he truly respected. "What about your sister?" my mother asked. Her voice was fragile, carrying a faint trace of her old instinct to bridge the gap between her children. My expression hardened instantly. "Harper remains entirely outside my perimeter," I stated. "She stole from my company. She demanded extortion money. She treated me with unyielding contempt. She must maintain her retail employment and pay her own living expenses for a minimum of 2 consecutive years before I even consider acknowledging her existence. If you attempt to manipulate me into a reunion with her, I will sever all contact with you permanently." The iron boundary was set. There was no room for negotiation or emotional pleading. They recognized the terms were final. My parents stood up from their leather chairs. They looked at the daughter they threw into the freezing winter. They saw a chief executive officer who held their future access in her hands. They thanked me for my time and walked out of the boardroom. I remained seated at the head of the glass table. I listened to the heavy oak doors click shut. I turned my chair around and looked out the panoramic windows, watching the rain streak across the thick glass. I did not feel a sudden rush of heartwarming closure. True healing is rarely cinematic. It is a slow, methodical process of enforcing borders and protecting your own peace. I survived a toxic household by becoming untouchable. I built an empire because I refused to let their rejection define my trajectory. If you are watching this and navigating your own difficult family dynamics, I want to offer you a piece of hard-earned clarity. You do not owe your abusers a comfortable resolution. You are not required to tolerate disrespect just because you share a bloodline. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep your family warm. Sometimes the best thing you can do is build your own house and let them realize they do not have a key. My name is Lenora Jotsna. I am 26 years old, and I own the ground I stand on. I have one final question for you before I go. Would you have let them stay at the party? Let me know below.
Lenora's journey from a freezing car in a supermarket parking lot to the head of a corporate boardroom is not just a tale of financial triumph. It is a profound exploration of the hidden fractures that can tear a household apart from the inside out. When we step back from the shock of the black leather folder and the faded yellow receipts, we realize that this story conveys a powerful message for parents within the context of American family culture, which values both individual independence and the responsibility of equitable parenting. It forces us to hold up a mirror to our own domestic lives and ask difficult questions about the nature of love, duty, and the invisible ledgers we force our children to carry. In so many households, the concept of equality is dangerously misunderstood. Fairness in the family isn't about equal treatment, but about responsible treatment. When guardians decide to split their empathy, the results are devastating. Parents treating their children vastly differently. One forced to become independent early, the other completely overprotected, can easily create deep and lasting trauma. The damage does not always manifest in loud arguments. It often takes root in silent observations, as one child watches the other receive the grace and support they are fundamentally denied. In American culture, while encouraging independence, parents still have a responsibility to ensure a fair and reasonable foundation for all their children. A foundation built on manufactured hardship for one and endless subsidies for another is not a foundation at all. It is a fault line waiting to rupture. There is a pervasive myth that harsh conditions forge stronger individuals, a belief that early suffering breeds resilience. However, teaching children independence doesn't mean burdening them too early. A home should be a sanctuary, not a landlord-tenant arrangement designed to extract labor from a minor. Forcing a 14-year-old to pay rent is no longer a life lesson, but a deprivation of childhood and basic parental responsibility. When a father looks across a kitchen table and demands cash from a teenager, he is not building character. He is dismantling safety. The message here is, independence needs to be guided and built gradually, not imposed through extreme financial pressure. True self-reliance is nurtured through mentorship and gradual responsibility, not by pushing a child to the brink of survival over $150. The architecture of a healthy household relies heavily on the invisible bonds of reliability. Favoritism in the family breaks lasting trust. It creates an environment where love is transactional and conditional, subject to the whims of parental preference. In American society, family relationships are heavily reliant on trust and mutual respect. When those foundational elements are stripped away, the structural integrity of the family collapses. When parents show blatant favoritism, children not only feel wronged, but may also lose emotional connection with their family as adults. They learn to seek safety in isolation, understanding early on that the people who were supposed to protect them are the very people they must protect themselves against. The scapegoat does not just lose a bedroom, they lose the fundamental belief that they are worthy of unconditional care. Adults often make the fatal mistake of assuming that children lack the capacity to document their own mistreatment. But youth does not equal amnesia. Children remember how they were treated and will respond when they grow up. Every dismissed achievement, every ignored plea, and every yellow carbon copy receipt is filed away in the mind of a neglected child. The detail of keeping all the bills reveals one thing. Children may remain silent, but they don't forget. The silence of a child is rarely a sign of acceptance. It is usually the sound of them calculating their exit strategy. In Western culture, as adults, they tend to confront and demand justice directly, rather than endure it as in some East Asian cultures. They return to the table not to beg for a seat, but to present the ledger that was forced upon them, demanding that the debts of the past be acknowledged in the cold light of day. Ultimately, the wealth of a household is not measured by the zip code it occupies or the Ivy League degrees hanging on its walls. Parental responsibility doesn't end in material things, but in morality. A family is a place that teaches values, fairness, and unconditional love. When a household operates purely on financial extortion and performative status, it loses its soul. If these values are replaced by money or favoritism, the consequences are not only conflict, but also a breakdown of family relationships. The damage cascades through the years, leaving empty chairs at holiday tables and silent phone lines on birthdays. As we dissect the wreckage of the Jyotsna family, the warnings become glaringly apparent. The core message for American parents: don't confuse discipline with disguised punishment. Disguising cruelty as a life lesson does not teach a child how to thrive. It teaches them how to survive without you. Don't let favoritism destroy your relationship with your children. The child you coddle will learn entitlement, and the child you cast out will learn to build a fortress that you can never enter. Fairness, respect, and consistent love are the foundation of a strong family. Without those pillars, the entire structure eventually collapses under the weight of its own hypocrisy. What you do to your children today will be how they treat you in the future. If this deep dive into family dynamics, silent survival, and the inescapable truth of accountability resonated with your own experiences, please take a moment to subscribe and share your thoughts with Sophia Told Stories. We bring these narratives to light because the shadows of our past often hold the keys to understanding our present, and sharing them helps us realize we are never truly walking these paths alone. We all carry a shoebox of some kind, filled with the invisible receipts of the things we were denied and the harsh lessons we were forced to learn too soon. You look at the carefully drawn boundaries in your own life, the walls you built brick by brick to protect your peace, and the people standing on the outside wondering why they no longer hold a key. You trace the edges of your own survival, listening to the quiet hum of the life you constructed from the ground up. And in the silence of that realization, you find yourself staring ahead, thinking, "This feels so much like me."